Have you ever found yourself watching the Olympics and thought to yourself, what in the tarnation is this freaking sport? Well, then today's video is right up your alley. Let's count down the 10 Olympic events that simply should not be there. Let's go. Number 10, fencing. This one has been in every single one of the modern Olympic Games, going all the way back to 1896. And not only that, but it started as only having 3 events, and somehow it's ended up at 12 events, 6 for men and 6 for women, and that is 12 more than we actually need. If there is a more elitist activity that you can name, I would love to hear it. This event has highbrow, blue blood English prep school written all over it. To say that the average person or the average nation has any sort of cultural connection to this is laughable. And why is it called fencing? I don't see any fences, do you? Maybe if they called it sword fighting, which they absolutely should, they could get more people interested in this farce. But until then, it just needs to be outright eliminated from the games. Number 9, archery. So you're telling me that the thing I played at summer camp and got awarded merit badges for it as a kid is an Olympic event? Get serious. Not only is this kind of a ridiculous sport, I'm putting sport in air quotes there, but it's not even a competitive sport because the South Koreans have absolutely dominated this event for like 30 years. The good news is that from 1920 to 1972, archery was not included as an Olympic event, which means that it got booted from the games before, and we can sure as heck do it again if we want. We ought to chuck this one out and slot in squash, if you ask me. Number 8, shooting. So we live in a world where gun violence is a huge issue, school shootings make international news, and so many lives are tragically cut short by guns. So what do? We make it an Olympic event. Look, I don't care where you stand on the issue of gun control. That's not what this is about. This is 100% about the lunacy of shooting guns being an Olympic event. It's absurd that this is even labeled a sport. And again, sports go into air quote. And there are multiple events in the shooting category, including air pistol, air rifle, trap, and skeet. Trap and skeet sounds like an Atlanta rapper or something. Different weapons get different events. It's insanity. And you know which country has done the best in the shooting category since day one? I'll give you 2 guesses, but you'll only need 1. Way to go, America. Number 7, handball. This sport was introduced at the 1972 Olympics in Munich for the men and in 1976 in Montreal for the ladies. Obviously, that's an issue, having differing timelines for men and women, but really, the issue is that this was introduced at all in the first place. Look, this isn't a chirp of handball as a game or a sport, not in the slightest. I actually kind of like watching handball. It's interesting for sure. The issue here is actually the lack of global appeal of the sport. It's not all that popular globally, and in the Olympics themselves, only 12 nations get represented in handball. 12, that's it. So it's hard for a global sporting event like the Olympics to be considered global when a niche sporting event represented by like 6% of the world is included. So in summary, handball is fun, but it shouldn't be in the Olympics. Number 6, modern pentathlon. So as the name suggests, the modern pentathlon includes 5 events, and that's really where this goes off the rails and starts to erode all the rationale for this being an Olympic event. You know what the 5 events are? They are fencing, freestyle swimming, equestrian show jumping, pistol shooting, and cross-country running, which is about as weird a set of events as you can imagine, but there is a reason for that. Think of it this way. Sword skills, swimming, horse riding, shooting a gun, and running were all the skills required of a soldier, hence the creation of this event. Isn't that fun? So obviously this one is a bit outdated, but that's not even my main objection here. My big problem is that all of those events are individually their own events already at the Olympics, so this just seems like duplication. So while it will disappoint all of the viewers tuning in from Roman legions around the world, it needs to go. We're at the halfway point, halfway home. You might even say we've done a pentathlon in this video so far. Before we extend this into a decathlon, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. It really helps out. Okay, back to the dumb events. Number 5, equestrian. You probably knew this one was coming, right? It's as obvious as the nose on a horse's face. Look, I'm just gonna say it, the horse is the athlete here, not the person. I'm not saying the humans aren't doing anything, they clearly are, but the horse is doing most of the work, and that alone should force its removal from the Olympics. And even if you're cool with the horses being in the Olympics, which I can actually half wrap my head around, then at least put the horses in better events, like do polo as an Olympic sport. Put that one in if you're gonna take advantage of these animals. And again, I come back to the fencing level eliteness of this event. There's a reason you hear about royal family members from European nations competing in this event. It's literally made for rich people. But I guess it's on brand. Rich people just own something, in this case the horse, and yet they somehow get the credit, in this case the medals. And if that's not a social commentary, I don't know what is. Number 4, table tennis. I can see this is going to be a controversial choice, that's fine. After all, this is a universally popular game, we've all played it at some point, and it's popular for both men and women, which is a big deal for the International Olympic Committee when deciding on which events to include. However, there are a couple of problems here. First, this feels less like a sport and more like a pastime or a hobby or a drinking game. If table tennis is allowed, then why isn't something like darts allowed? That makes no sense to me. But second, this is one of the strongest examples of a sport that is absolutely dominated by one country. China has won 60 out of a total of 115 medals ever handed out in this event ever. More than half of all the medals went to a single country. It's not even close. This was one of the reasons why something like softball was kicked out of the Olympics. It was just not globally competitive. And if you're booting softball, you ought to boot table tennis too. Sorry, but facts are facts. Number 3, trampoline. This is an event that was only added in the year 2000 at the Sydney Olympics, which makes sense. It makes sense because this should not be in the Olympics, as was evidenced by the more than 100 years we lived without it. Trampoline falls under the broad range of gymnastics, and I will fully admit that gymnasts are incredible athletes. They are perhaps the most athletic of all Olympic athletes, and that is really saying something. And I'm not saying trampoliners, is that what they're called? The hell if I know. I'm not saying trampoliners aren't fit or doing something physical, they clearly are, but doesn't it seem a bit weird that there are kids on TikTok pulling off the same moves? If Gen Z vloggers are pulling the same tricks as Olympians, then I know this should not be in the Olympics. Number 2, race walking. Can you imagine the conversation that had to occur to come up with this event? Okay guys, I got this idea, hear me out. What if people just walk fast? Come on, this is so dumb. This event has actually had multiple versions, as there was a 20-kilometer event and a 50-kilometer event. Oh, but that 50-kilometer event was only for the men. Sorry, ladies, apparently you can't walk that long or something dumb like that. The good news is that they got rid of that 50-kilometer event, but the bad news is they replaced it with a mixed relay version, so they just doubled down on the stupidity. Like so many events on this list, there is no denying that these athletes are fit and are doing something physically demanding, but that is not enough of a reason to keep this weirdo event around any longer. Number 1, sailing. Today's number 1 event is sailing, and for good reason. Remember when I said that there wasn't any event more elitist than fencing? And then I talked about equestrian, which is also super elitist? Well, feast your eyes on this rich man's playground. This event was actually called yachting until the 2000 Olympic Games. It does not get more posh than that. Look, I'm sorry to all the sailors out there. I'm not saying sailing isn't a good time. There is nothing more fun than being out on the open ocean. It is a beautiful experience. But this is an event that feels more like a mode of transportation, not a sport. Can you imagine NASCAR or Formula One racing being an Olympic event? Of course not, it's absurd. So isn't this just the nautical equivalent? You can't convince me otherwise, and when you combine that with the cringy country club vibes that sailing gives off, you've got yourself an event that needs to be scrapped permanently. There you have it. Good times today, folks. Great to tuck into this list. What do you think? Did I get anything wrong today? Anything I missed that should be in there, or anything I included that you think should actually stay in the Olympics? Let me know in the comments section below, or as I like to call it, the Olympic Village.